Since the release of the previous DLX guns like the Shocker Amp and the Luxe TM40, both of the DLX guns have the same bolt design. And just like the Amp and the TM40, the newly released $1,100 Shocker Era and this $1,800 Luxe Idol also share a very similar internals. If the Era and the Idol have similar bolt designs, do they actually shoot any differently? And DLX claims this is the most redesigned Luxe ever. Are they telling the truth? And why would you buy an Idol over a Shocker Era? The Idol really doesn't look all that much different than previous Luxes. It still has that sleek and slender silhouette that the Luxes have really been known for. But if you look at the left-hand side, you're going to notice that huge new OLED screen, whereas the TM40 had that small OLED screen on the back of the grip frame. Most of you are probably just wondering how the thing shoots, but let's talk about the bolt just for a minute. The Idol has a bolt that is very similar to the one that's released in the TM40, with a few changes all in the way of making the Idol a little bit easier on paint. But we've seen all those upgrades before just a few months ago in the Shocker Era. By adding these ports on the bottom of the bolt and changing the spool, the Idol has a little bit softer bolt acceleration. So in other words, it goes a little bit slower at the beginning of the movement. So when the bolt actually contacts Paintball, it's a little bit softer than it was on the TM40. The Idol also addresses the rollback problems the TM40 had. And because the TM40 had that open face bolt, paintballs could roll back into the bolt just a little bit. And now the Idol, by adding that cone, makes it just more difficult for the paintball to roll back. So you're gonna get more of an even stack of paintballs. You're not gonna have problems with it offsetting and possibly the eyes not working or having a problem with clipping or breaking paint now. The changes aren't huge, but changing the timing really does kind of affect the way the gun shoots. Since the bolt doesn't technically take as long to move forward, the gun kind of feels a little bit less poppy and maybe a little bit smoother than the TM40. The sound signature is a bit higher in pitch, and that higher pitch is a little bit more noticeable to our human ears. We kind of just pick up on that higher pitch. So the Idol does seem a little bit louder when we're comparing them right here. Editor Brad. And after looking at this audio a little bit more, I think I have one more idea of why the Idol seems louder. If we average everything out and you kind of look at the frequencies, that Idol's going to be in that red, and then the orange is going to be the TM40. The Idol is certainly louder in the areas our ears can just hear, right? I mean, our ears are more sensitive at certain frequencies, and that's really right in this like 4,000-ish to 7,000 range. So that's really the first reason that the Idol seems louder. Then just look at how much louder the first half of the shot is on the Idol. I mean, it's way more than the TM40. So it's just going to be louder for longer, making the thing seem louder. And that louder first half of the shot is also the reason why the Idol sounds considerably different than the TM40. This audio stuff is so confusing. I hope that's how it works. You can also, just like the previous Luxes and the Shocker Era, move this can O-ring to its rear position. This will add more volume to the bolt. It's mainly only going to be that useful in cold weather, and it's also helping the gun cycle a little bit quicker, so it's going to work a little bit better with mechanical guns. We can definitely answer one of those questions. If they have the same bolt system, do they shoot any different? You know, Era and Idol. They do. I think that the Idol shoots a little bit better. The Idol has a little more volume in its bolt, and it kind of helps it shoot better. It's a little bit smoother. It kicks a little bit less. I mean, it's slight, but it's definitely there. And the Shocker Era reminds me of really just how the TM40 shoots. I mean, I think that the TM40, the Shocker Era, and the Amp all shoot very, very similar. But I think if you were an Era owner or if you're a TM40 owner and you actually shoot the Idol, you'll notice a slight difference, but it's not, dramatic. If you'd like to buy yourself an Idol or an Era, or maybe just check out different colors and pricing, use the links below as they help support this channel and make these videos possible. You're still going to get 2 inserts when you buy an Idol with that Freak XL barrel kit, but this time they're labeled insane. They're labeled small and large bore, which just is kind of weird to me. Rumor has it they're actually a 682 and a 688 insert, which are, I don't know, paint is so small. I've been using paint that's rolling through a 678. 678. One thing that old Luxe owners will for sure notice when you pick up and shoot the Idol is just how much better the trigger feels. The Idol has a new trigger stop that is all metal on metal, so the trigger feels much more snappy and really crisp. I really, really like the way the new triggers feel. It really reminds me of the DSR, maybe DSR Plus, although I think that the Idol might be a little bit lighter and just a little bit smoother even than the DSR Plus. Maybe it reminds me of the way the old Planet Eclipse guns felt, like the Geo 3.5 or LV1, how they're just like bang, bang, they just feel really good. And there's that huge screen. They placed that screen high on the side of the frame, really so you'd kind of get a good grip. Guns like the M3 Plus have the screen a little bit lower, so maybe your hand's kind of like, rubbing on the screen and you can't get a good grip. So moving that screen up a little bit, you got more hand on a grip, Gun turns on exactly the same way. There's just a single button on the back of the grip frame. You hold it down, gun turns on, and it feels really fast. It certainly feels like it boots up quite a bit quicker than the TM40. That voice sounds much more clear, and the voice also sounds a lot quicker. So it's just like, you get it over with quick. And you can also just turn that voice off completely, which I'd recommend it. It's just, you get all that important information on the screen: battery level, tournament lock, eye status, firing mode, and rate of fire. Really all the exact same information you'd see on the TM40 screen, minus the firmware version. But the screen's really big, but most of it's just the Luxe logo. So it's like, I don't know. Imagine you had a phone and like 80% of the screen was just, the Apple or like the Android logo. Screen looks great though. It's really crisp. It's very bright. I think it's a little bit easier to see in sunlight than that TM40 OLED screen. It just works like you think a screen would work. The one thing I do wish they'd kind of change though is the way you interact with the gun in programming mode. You hold the trigger down and hold the power button down, and then it just goes into programming mode, and you can select by pulling the trigger kind of which parameter you're in. But what kind of sucks though, if you go past one, you're like, damn, you gotta like, pull the trigger 30 more times to go all the way back to the top of the menu. Whereas other guns like the Dye guns, they have that like little up and down toggly thing. I just wish they kind of like put a toggle in there or a way to just navigate the menu a little bit quicker. There was an opportunity, I struck out. Getting to that OLED screen is completely different and best done in order. First, you remove that new frame backstrap, which is really cool and not at the same time. I like the idea. It's built really well. It's solid. But my God, is it hard to get off. You have to put your thumb and finger on these like little pockets and kind of push the backstrap back, which works fine, but they're so freaking pointy. Like these areas are so sharp that when you press really hard with your fingers to be able to get any like grip and pull it back, it just hurts, right? I don't know. Maybe normally I probably wouldn't be complaining about this, but shooting this video, I took this thing off like 15 or 20 times in a row, and I just couldn't take it anymore. Jamming your, little soft finger pads. And then the inside of the thing's super sharp too. My thumb got all cut taking it off. Mainly because I got to take it off all funky because my fingers got so sore. And then was taken apart during a live stream and then cut my finger again. But I don't think that's something that's gonna happen normally, right? You're not gonna take the backstrap off and on 15 or 20 times in a row. You're really just gonna take it off once and probably put it back on. The whole reason you'd wanna take that backstrap off is to be able to charge this bad boy up, and you still charge it with USB-C. They've just kind of moved the location to the back of the gun. And you can also see that brand new battery lock. And the battery comes out much nicer now. It just feels a lot better. It's not like the TM40 was bad. On the TM40, the battery slid out the front and this little plastic strip kind of held it in place. And now you have this like metal bar kind of lever hook thing that holds that battery in place. It just feels much nicer. It feels really strong. The battery's not going to come loose. The contacts on the battery also supposed to be much better than the TM40. The TM40, sometimes the battery could lose contact and the gun would shut off. That's pretty bad. The Idol shouldn't do that. You remove the trigger frame just like the TM40. It still has really what I think the slickest trigger removal in the game. It works very well. You remove the bolt, flip up this back latch, unlatch the front, and the frame just comes off. And inside there, you can actually see the toolless solenoid removal, which is exactly the same as the TM40. And I really like this. Well, I don't know, I'm on and off if you actually need toolless solenoid removal, but taking the solenoid off of the TM40 and the Idol is very easy. It's much nicer than was on the Shocker eras, or is on the Shocker era. The TM40 did have a problem with the frame though. So to connect the I board to the main board, there is a wireless contact between the frame and the body. And this had to be aligned perfectly. That's why on the TM40 you could adjust the latch to help line those spots up. That contact on the I board is just much larger, so if for some reason the frame is off by a fraction of a millimeter, it'll still work perfectly fine. And when you have the frame off, those grips will fall right off and you can see inside the frame. And not much is there to mess with really. I mean, it's just, sealed up. You see the battery maybe in there, you can see the speaker. But I really like these new grips. They feel much nicer than any of the previous Luxe grips. They just feel really good. And I think it makes the Idol feel much more like a premium higher end gun than the TM40 did. It was kind of like when Planet Eclipse went from the Go3 grips to the CS1 grips. It's not like there's a huge revolutionary change in anything, but just having them be totally toolless and kind of more integrated into the frame definitely makes it feel a lot nicer to me, and I think gives it a much, much better feel. On the bottom of that frame is still going to be a very familiar on-off ASA, but it's just much easier to use now. The previous Luxes had a very narrow and kind of difficult to use lever. I mean, if you had sausage fingers or if you're using gloves, the lever was just hard to use. And now it's so much wider, it's just really, really easy to turn it off. And the lever goes all the way forward now, so it's not at like a crazy angle, so you can't accidentally bump it on anything like you could before. That on-off also seals completely different than before. It now uses these little air plugs just like we saw on the Shocker era. One side goes into the ASA and the other side slots into the bottom of the frame. And before this, it was just a single O-ring that sealed flat on the ASA. It really gave nothing for movement, so if the ASA ever got loose, it would certainly leak from there. Now if it's loose because of those plugs, there's a little more play, so you can actually use the ASA pretty loose and it won't leak. And they've also used the exact same plugs in the body to frame area. So same situation, right? If the frame gets a little bit loose, it would have leaked a lot before, but now if it gets a little bit loose, it won't leak. While the changes to the Idol aren't huge, they certainly do add up. Well, maybe not so much in performance, but definitely ease of use. While I like that back strap, it's definitely hard to remove. I like how it's all aluminum though, that's cool. The changes to the battery removal are nice. Adding those air plugs are fantastic. Adding the wider lever to the ASA is very nice. The OLED screen I could take or leave. The changes to the grips, probably the part that I like the most. They just make the gun look and feel much nicer. I really like how it's sleek. I like how they're all sealed up. They're probably going to last just as long as the gun is too. With the release of the Idol in the era, these mid-range and high-end guns have become even closer. Just a few months ago, all the major upgrades we saw in the Shocker era have kind of worked their way over to the Idol. But there's certainly still a few things that make the Idol nicer. The Idol's toolless frame is great, and his toolless solenoid remove is also much better than the era. You're getting toolless eye covers, a much better on-off, that USB-C charging, the huge OLED screen, and I much, much prefer the ergonomics and the feel of the Idol over the era. And there's also a lot of other things that are going to make the Idol nicer than the era. But many of them are going to be creature comforts or just kind of more premium features. But when it comes down to it, the Idol and the era are going to perform very, very similarly. And it's going to come down to you whether that $1,800 price or $1,100 price is better. But one thing we know for sure, all of those changes that they've made to the Idol certainly make it the most redesigned Luxe ever.